you've heard of Federal, you've heard of Queen Anne, you've heard of Arts and Crafts style. How about Galilean Chesapeake style? Welcome to the Renaissance Woodworker, episode number 22. This week, we go old school. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Renaissance Woodworker. This is episode number 22, and this week we're going to talk about first century woodworking. Any of those of you who have been following me on Twitter or paid attention to a few of my recent posts on Lumberjocks, you know that I was presented with an interesting challenge this week to come up with a woodworking project that Jesus would have done. So that's a little bit what we're going to talk about this week. But before we get into that, if you have questions, concerns, comments, or just want to reach out and say hi as usual, you can contact me via email at shannon@rogersfinewoodworking.com. You can drop a comment on the blog at rogersfinewoodworking.com/blog. You can find me on Twitter at RenaissanceWW. You can also find me on Skype by the same call sign. So this week, well, like most of us, we had to go back to work. And as usual, starting off a brand new year, I immediately was very, very busy and lots of rah-rah, let's get going, great year, and ignore recession and all that stuff. So didn't get into the shop a whole lot. However, on it was either Wednesday or Thursday night around 10:30, I was presented with the challenge of, oops, I forgot I need another one of those green and white acrylic pens for my advisory tomorrow. So ran downstairs to the shop and turned out another one of those acrylic pens for my wife to take to her 5th grade advisory class for a birthday. And, you know I've said it before, but man, I really don't like to turn acrylic. But in that same vein, I wanted to take a moment to announce the next pen of the month or pen giveaway from Penn State Industries. We kind of took a little bit of a hiatus there over the holidays. I wanted to get that last Majestic Junior kit out in time for the holidays, but got away from us over the month of December. So I've been in talks with Penn State, and they have actually, I think today, shipped out the next kit that we'll be giving away. I plan to release that podcast 2 Mondays from now on January 26th, I believe. And this time, Penn State is releasing another one of their brand new kits. This is the Bullet Cartridge Pen. And if you get their catalog, saw that it was on the cover of the latest issue, and it's exactly as it sounds. The metal part of the pen where you grip it actually looks like, and I believe it might even be, the metallic cartridge of a rifle bullet. They're going to send me that kit, all the accoutrements that go with it, and actually a camouflage acrylic pen blank. So it should make an interesting pen turning episode. They're also going to include some of their plastics polish. They've got a new plastics finishing kit, and I wanted to try that out and show you guys how it's done. So maybe I'll like turning acrylic a lot more when we use this plastics polishing kit. You know, it's not that I mind turning acrylic, it's mainly just the smell and the static electricity that builds up with the acrylic shavings, but it sure get a really amazing response when you turn a pen that way. Most people don't believe that I turned it because they think all you can turn is wood. So look forward to that. Anybody who got their name in for the drawing before, no worries, you're still in the drawing, but anybody who did not get me their name, please send me an email, Shannon@RogersFineWoodworking. Just say pen drawing entry or whatever, and I'll make sure that your name gets thrown into the hat for that drawing. I will be making that drawing probably on Sunday night, January 25th, so that I can get editing and such done to get the podcast released on Monday evening. So good luck, everybody, and stay tuned for that in a couple of weeks. Beyond that one acrylic pen, I really have not had much time to do anything in my shop other than the first century woodworking project we'll get to in a minute. As far as the Roubo Workbench update, I've been doing little things here and there in reference to the latest Modern Wood Shop episode, The Pendulum, that Dave Knopfs did. He talks about how he plans to have more fun in woodworking and not be stressed about deadlines or anything, and that's pretty much how I feel about this Roubo. I definitely want to get it done because I'm excited to have the actual tool of the workbench to work on, and I do need to get it done somewhat quickly because there's a lot of wood required for this bench, and it just takes up a lot of space milling all this lumber. But frankly, I'm pretty pretty mellow about the whole project. You know, I'm getting done what I can get done, and there's no deadline on it. I am able to at least move some things aside if I need to move on to something like this uh, um, Roman woodworking, first century woodworking project, or the occasional pen. So I'm taking my time, but as it stands right now, I have the boards for the top fully milled and surfaced on 4 sides, and they are ready to start being laminated. I've gotten my tub o glue and my rollers and such to put on all that glue, and I've started rough milling the parts for the legs, mainly because I just want to verify that I have the wood I need for all this, because if I need to go out and get any more, I want to give it some time to season and acclimate in my shop. So I pretty much have the leg pieces jointed and planed, and they're about ready to be glued up. I need to do a little bit of thicknessing before I glue those into laminations for the 5-inch square legs. But that's where I stand on the Roubo, and there'll be some updates hitting the blog and maybe a few highlights in the podcast over the next couple of weeks. Next week should be kind of another potpourri podcast with a Tales from the Horde edition as I bring out some exotic wood from my stash. So maybe I'll throw a little bit in there in the podcast next week. So stay tuned. This week's blog of the week is an active Twitterer. Jeremiah Rodriguez runs a website called Sawdust is Life, and his Twitter handle is Sawdust is Life. He's got a really interesting site. He's got a lot of features set up, and you can tell there's a lot of room for growth in there. He's listed several different projects and skill building tutorials, which honestly there's not a lot of content in those sites yet, but you can see that he's got the kind of the placeholders to direct you there, and I think he's got some really good ideas around that. He does have a shop cam up and running, and he's got some really good blog posts and a couple videos appended to those blogs. Jeremiah is out in Provo, Utah, so I'm not sure how much shop time he's getting because I think it's about -40 below out there right now. So Jeremiah, if you're listening, stay warm, buddy, and keep hand planing. That'll keep you warm. So check out this site at sawdustislife.com, and there's the blog, and all the links are from there. And find him on Twitter and say hello. So anyway, let's move on to our topic for this week. My mother-in-law called me a week ago on a Sunday evening and said, I have a challenge for you, which always kind of scares me a little bit when I hear her say that. She is a very, very active Sunday school teacher at her Presbyterian church, and is just a born educator. She was an elementary educator most of her career until my wife, who was the oldest daughter, was born, and then she became the stay-at-home mom. She hasn't quite lost that educator bug and has filled that niche in her life by being one of the best Sunday school teachers I've ever met. She sinks a lot of passion and a lot of enthusiasm to each lesson, and the school where she's teaching has a pretty defined curriculum to take the kids through one story after another. And as she was going through the curriculum, she discovered that the next class would be a study on Jesus as a child. Well, whether you're a Christian or whatever your faith is, there's not much written about Jesus. First there was the birth. We all celebrate that at Christmas, and then kind of not a whole lot until he's 30 and suddenly out and preaching. So it became kind of be a challenge. And my mother-in-law said, well, I know that Joseph was a carpenter, as was Jesus, so maybe he spent some time helping his earthly father in his carpenter shop. So she called me and said, do you think that there's a small project we could put together that the kids in my class could do some kind of first century carpentry? And the wheels in my mind started turning. Of course, I immediately asked, yeah, I think we could do something, but when do you need this done? Well, her immediate response and somewhat expected response was, well, next week, 7 days from now. So I began tossing some ideas around, and I knew that the age she teaches is 5 and 6 year olds, in other words, first grade. So I knew that we really, as far as tools, there couldn't be anything sharp. For that matter, even rough lumber wouldn't really be good because we'd be talking about splinters there. So we decided that something where that they could hammer, they could pound things, especially the little boys would love to pound something. So I was digging through the kitchen drawers and came up with a bag full of wooden crab mallets. Those of you in the Chesapeake region know what I'm talking about. And thought, what could we pound in place? So I went back to my green woodworking skills and my Windsor chair building skills, and I thought, how about a couple little stools? So seeing as these are, little kids, not very tall, I figured a stool anywhere from 10 to 12 inches high would be sufficient, wouldn't have feet dangling off the ground. And a stool that low to the ground really wasn't necessary to build things like stretchers into the legs to stabilize them much. And I had seen a small stool that had 3 legs in it as I was doing some research on woodworking of the era. And I saw more of a stylized painting painted in the Renaissance of Jesus with his father in the carpenter shop. And it'll pop up here in the blog. And a couple of artworks like that, I saw some of the furniture there, and I thought this little stool might be fun. What we could do is drill holes in the seat and cut a small taper on the top of the legs and put a kerf in that taper, and then hammer wedges into those tapers to secure them in place. And it turned out to be a fun project, and that's what I'm going to walk you through in the video here. Before I jump into that, though, I wanted to share some of the research I came up with. First of all, I have to thank everybody over at Lumberjocks. I put this query up in the forums, and I got some really, really great response, got a good conversation going. And definitely Carrie Holtman over at the Village Carpenter, who reminded me about her blog post she did on the Roman woodworking textbook by Roger Ulrich. And finally, of course, I have to thank Christopher Schwartz, who I emailed, and he also pointed me to Roger Ulrich's book on Roman woodworking, and then also to Jeffrey Killen's book on Egyptian woodworking, which, credit where credit's due, Carrie also mentioned that she had a copy of that book, and there were some interesting things. Chris also pointed me to Roger Ulrich and Jeffrey Killen's websites, and I found some really, really good information there and some really cool images that I'll be sharing with you. The long and short of it, though, really to no surprise, is the woodworking was not all that different from what we do today. I mean, certainly barring all tools that plug in. But, you look at examples of Egyptian furniture and you'll see uses of dovetails, you'll see frame and panel construction and a lot of Roman woodworking. And a lot of the tools they use have striking similarities to tools we use today. The following is a picture of a hand plane that was removed from the ruins at Pompeii. And there's been several drawings, and here's another drawing of a Roman woodworking plane. And Christopher Schwartz did a recreation of this, and so did fellow lumberjack Yorkshire Stewart, who did a recreation of this and actually built a really nice blog on Lumberjacks on that, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. So the planes are very, very similar. But what I was really interested in is woodworking, the type of woodworking that would have been done in the really rural setting that would be typical of Nazareth or Galilee. And this kind of goes along the same line that Adam Carabini's been talking about with 17th century woodworking. We're all familiar with Queen Anne stylings and some of the beautiful carving that you see from that era. But honestly, the common man out in the in the woods and out in the countryside was building furniture that was much more utilitarian. If you look at some of the things that Adam has done in his Arts and Mysteries column, building those long benches and things with just standard kind of Windsor style construction, that's a little bit more furniture for the common man. And that's what I was thinking about when I wanted to find furniture that would be typical of a very rural setting during the 1st century. And that's when Chris's point towards Jeffrey Killen's site on Egyptian woodworking was. Chris tells me that he actually does teach some classes, a little bit more 1st century woodworking for the common man as he describes it, and I quote, Adam Carabini and a loincloth. So I advise you to check out his website. There's some good information there, and I will post links to that in the blog. But as far as tools, you're going to see a lot of similarities. Roughing out of lumber was done using axes and adzes. It was also, there were some saws that were used. Interestingly enough, despite everything that the Renaissance and the Catholic Church has done to westernize Jesus and Joseph and Mary, he was born in what we now call the Middle East and was probably quite dark-skinned and pretty ethnic as compared to what we see in some of those Renaissance paintings. And with that comes styles of woodworking that would be similar to that of Asian woodworking. You'll see a lot of these paintings where there is an actual workbench. In fact, it looks like a Nicholson's joiner bench in the workshop. In reality, most of the work was probably done on the floor or on a very, very low trestle, similar to Japanese woodworking. Saws, in the same vein, cut on the pull stroke. And there are several examples of archaeological finds of Roman woodworking saws and Egyptian woodworking saws that were, made some out of copper. Later on they were made out of bronze, but bronze was quite expensive, so generally only the Roman army had, the money to spend on bronze tools. So for the most part it was copper, and the teeth were kind of nibbled out. And interestingly enough, the teeth were all set to the same side. So instead of modern times where we set every other tooth, this one to the left, that one to the right, they were all set to one side or another, which made for interesting cutting. And then, of course, we also had the frame saw or the bow saw, and that was used for things like resawing and such. But really, once you had the lumber cut into planks, the adze is what was used for most of the shaping and refining. Everything from shaping it more and smoothing it more into plank to hollowing in instances of maybe carving spoons or troughs or even bowls. So you'll see a lot of instances of the adze both in Roman finds and as well as out in the countryside. Just a little bit more rudimentary usage of them, and typically it was something that was actually made, either it was made out of bronze in the case of the Roman army, or a lot of times it was made out of flint, just good old natural flint in the countryside wrapped around a wooden handle or something. The chisels were very, very similar to what we see today. Of course, the surviving examples we have, don't include the wooden handles, but they were made with a socket. And in some instances they were made of iron, other instances they were made out of bronze, and they look very similar to what we would call a firmer chisel. And they were used, from what I can tell in my research, a lot of the same ways. There is some evidence of Egyptians actually having thick, very stout mortising chisels in addition to firmer chisels. In most of the references I saw in Roman woodworking, it was mostly just more the firmer style chisel as well. So Mac McKinney, if you're out there, I'm not sure whether firmer chisels came from the French firmoir or not. Maybe they come from even further back in some sort of Latin root from the Roman era. Drills were generally used, what we call a bow drill, which kind of looks like a bow and arrow with the drill held in the taut section wrapped around it and the bow moved back and forth to cause the drill to turn. I would not want to try drilling a hole like this. It's amazing that anything got even done that way. So you'll see a lot of similarities to the tools we have today, and surprisingly, the technique and the joinery was very much the same. As we know, we've heard many people say dovetails were found in furniture, recovered from King Tut's tomb, but I think among the common man, we had a little bit more rudimentary, tongue and groove a little bit, some dados and rabbets. Certainly a lot of green wood construction was done, and that's why I was really excited to build these little stools using the typical green wood tenon and hole and the wedge to lock it in place. So all that being said, there's some great information out there. Roman woodworking by Roger Ulrich is definitely a source to look at. Egyptian woodworking by Jeffrey Killen also has some really, really good information. So as I said, I will post links to both of those sites, and check it out if you have any further interest. But before we waste too much more time, let's get down to the shop and I'll walk you through the Chesapeake Galilean style stool. So here we are back down in the shop. I've got a bunch of 2x10 construction lumber, and actually when I was buying it at Home Depot it was pretty quiet that night, so I just had the fine folks at Home Depot go ahead and cross-cut it into 4-foot wide, 4-foot long sections. And just using the cross-cut sled on my saw, I'm going to cut these into 9 1/4 inch lengths, make them perfect squares. Now here you can see that price tag on the end and a little bit of staples in there, so I'm just adjusting that enough so that I can clip off the end 90 degrees and make sure I don't catch any of those staples at the same time. And I've got my sled set for 9 1/4 inches, referencing the same side that I used to square it up. I'll go ahead and cut that seat piece to size. Now I need to drill the holes at compound angles, so I'm going to make a jig, which always means pulling out my pocket hole screw jig, just some scrap MDF, and because I'm making 20 of these seats, I need some sort of jig to repeat all of the drilling angles since they are compound angles. And here I'm just assembling that jig together, and essentially what we've got here is a cat scratching post or no, sorry, it's a jig that is going to allow me to stack two of the seat planks together that have been glued together, and I did that on purpose. You can see that here to create a much thicker reference surface that I can reference a drill bit on. I've got a 3/4 inch spade bit with an extension arm on it, and there's a dowel in the center there, and I drilled a hole right down the center of that, and that is the same diameter dowel I'll be using for the legs. And what this allows me to do is reference that dowel against the edges of that MDF wall, and it makes sure that the compound angle has the legs splayed just so that the bottom of the legs would be even with the sides of the stool. Went ahead and drilled all three of those, bolted some kind of guide blocks on the side there out of MDF. Here's one of our first pieces. I'll put it in with the cup facing up. In other words, that's the part your butt's going to go on. It's a very firm fit in there. Then I'll put another spare seat blank on the bottom just to act as a backup so that I don't get too much blowout on the holes. And clamp that down to the bench top. Get it nice and firm in there. And what I'll be using is that same drill bit extension bit setup, but referencing it against the compound holes already drilled in the jig to repeatedly drill all three holes for the seat blanks. So here we go. I'm actually using one of my impact drivers. I find that it works really, really well in driving through this soft pine, and the ratcheting mechanism of it gives me a nice steady cut all the way through. I do have to occasionally pull it out and clear the chips. Moving on to the second hole. I also determined that the depth, just by measuring on the outside, was if I brought it level with where that extension bit starts, that was just deep enough to break through the bottom of the seat blank and into the backer piece below. So we'll just finish up the last hole, and let's take the clamps off and take it out of the jig, and you'll see that as I take the actual seat blank out of there, it's actually a very tight fit in that jig, and I was really happy with that because it kept everything stable, and it made sure that each one of those holes was in the exact same spot. And of course, then I dropped the blank on the floor, which is never really good for your project. So anyway, moving on. You can see I just clear a few of those chips out of the bottom. I'd get a little bit of tear on the bottom, and it's really not that important in the long run. Now, in order just to clean up and clear out any of the splinters that can get stuck in little fingers, I'm going to go ahead and use a 1/2 inch round over bit on the router table and round over both edges. The sequence I'm following here is what I always use on a router table. I do the end grain, then the side grain, the end grain, and the side grain, and that prevents you cleaning up, or allows you to clean up any of the tear up you might get routing that end grain surface. I flipped it over into the other side as well. Now it's time to get to the legs. I'm using 1 1/8 inch diameter dowels. I'll go ahead and square up that one end. I've got the fence on the crosscut sled set to 12.5 inches. I want the stools to be 12 inches tall, and I need a little bit of extra to stick through the top of the seat to flush up later. And I end up making 60 of these legs. I got 4 pieces per dowel. Now it's time to cut the tenon on that dowel. You need a tenon so that there's a bottom shoulder so the leg doesn't slip all the way through. I'm using a Veritas tenon cutter here that I've used for Windsor chairs before, and you'll see that level mark on the top that allows you to reference both angles. You can look straight down and see are you parallel to the leg, but then you can use that level bubble to determine are you parallel straight up and down with it as well. This will suck up your cordless drill batteries pretty substantially, so if you have a corded drill, it's the best thing to do here. Just a closer look at the tenon I'm making. You notice it's just slightly off center. It's not really a big deal. You want to try to keep it as centered as possible. Now over to the bandsaw. I'm going to go ahead and cut kerfs for those wedges in those saws. You can see behind the blade there's one of those little mag blocks, and that's just set up about 1.25 inches back from the blade to allow me to cut 1.25 inches deep kerfs on those tenons. Now we've got some 1/4 inch by 3/4 inch wide walnut stock. I've marked lines 1.5 inches down, and I'm basically just going from corner to corner. I'll cut it off, and I make 2 wedges. Those wedges are almost 1.5 inches long to fit into those 1.25 inch kerfs.
All right, everybody, this brings us to the final stage, the assembly. All of this work up to this point has really been designed so that I can take these parts into a first grade classroom and the kids will be able to put it together. But I'm not sure if I'll be able to get any footage while I'm there. So I wanted to at least show you how it all went together and kind of talk a little bit about some of the principles of this construction. One of the great things about this project certainly is something you could do with a child. At the second time, it could be scaled up very easily and turned into a footstool or a stool for yourself. The other cool thing is that it can be done almost entirely with hand tools. Now, in the footage that you've seen up till now, you'll see obviously I've been using power tools most of the way because I'm making 20 of these stools to take, well, tomorrow morning to the Sunday school class. But I think very, very easily you could be cross-cutting these boards, especially if you're buying, construction-grade lumber. There's not much to the servicing and prepping of that other than cross-cutting, and that's all I did in this instance. There were certainly a few bows and things in the seats, but I actually found if I put that cup up, it makes a very nice, comfortable seat. So the the legs would have been made round. Now there were lathes in Roman times called a tornus, I believe, but probably out in the rural countryside this would have been draw knifed, or at least some facsimile of a draw knife, and turned round. So it probably would have been highly faceted instead of this round dowel. The kerf in the top would probably have been done just using a chisel, and the tenon actually was done using a version of our good friend the spokeshave. So the actual cross-cutting of these seats to shape would have been done using a frame saw or a bow saw. And I did actually make one of these just using this saw. This is a new saw that I got off eBay, and worked like a charm. Of course, the assembly stage is all about the mallet. And we've had mallets for many, many years, but those are the only tools you need. So if you did want to kind of tackle maybe your first hand tool only project, this would be a great way to go. And if nothing else, you get a nice little footstool for the shop. If you did make it taller to suit an adult, I would advise putting stretchers on the bottom of the legs to prevent too much of the splay. But anyway, let's put one of these together, and I'll show you how it goes together. Keep in mind, I'm using no glue. Even though I could use glue, it's really not necessary the way this joint goes together. So I'm over here to my assembly table, and we'll walk through. So we've got our actual seat, and for the purposes of the class tomorrow, I've gone ahead and labeled the top very clearly, only because if you remember correctly, the holes for the legs are drilled at a compound angle which splays them out this way. So if you flipped it over, you'd end up with a bunch of legs coming in like this, teetering around in the central point. So really very simple. Just a matter of feeding the legs into the hole, and you'll find that a good twist is really all that's needed to get them in there. Now the key thing to remember is when you start twisting, keep twisting in the same direction. So in this instance, I'm turning counterclockwise. To stop and start rotating counterclockwise can a lot of times act as a way to almost remount the joint. So make sure you keep twisting in the same direction. Now, flip it upright. And let me get the camera here and show you one little detail. On the top, we can see the legs as they come through and the kerfs that I cut on the bandsaw. You'll see this pencil line here that I've drawn. This is basically just to kind of demonstrate the grain direction for the kids, but the key is we'll be taking this wedge and driving in here. This wedge will then spread the tenon apart, making the top of this leg wider than the hole we drilled, producing a very, very strong mechanical joint. But here's the thing. If we spread this leg apart this way, the way the grain orientation currently is, it's going to pull the wood apart and split along the line of the grain. So, what we have to do is rotate this leg 90 degrees. And now, as that tenon spreads, it's going to spread along the grain, and it's not going to cause a split across the wood. So that's really the key to green wood construction, because this seat is just a little bit wetter than the kiln-dried dowels. So this putting this wedge in is going to spread it apart and make a really snug fit, and then the wetter wood of the seat is going to shrink as it dries and tighten up on this tenon even further. And there's really no need for glue. As I said, you certainly can use it, but it's just not going to be necessary in this case. So let me go back over the tripod here. And now we've got that seated. The wedge slips in there. And a lot of times when I've made this type of wedge construction, instead of making the pre-cut saw curves on the bandsaw, I just will glue these legs in place just like they are now. And then after they're dry, I'll go back with a chisel and make my own kerf that way and then drive the wedge in. The actual kerf doesn't have to be that much. The widening of the tenon happens very close to the surface. So I'll fit all these wedges in. This just makes it a little bit easier to get the wedges in place. And now you can use a mallet like this one to pound those in, but actually what I find works best is a small metal hammer. It's a little bit more delicate, but now listen to the sound of this pounding in, and you'll hear the pitch change when we know it's seated. Now that is fully seated. We'll pound this one in place. That's good. And that's all she wrote. This chair is essentially done. Each one of those wedges is very, very firmly spread the top, and if you look at it from the side, you can see they've splayed out enough that it's extremely strong. This is not going anywhere. So from here, if I haven't just made you all sick by holding the camera like this, come on, go on the tripod. I feel like Tommy McDonald right now trying to get this tripod to work. Okay, now that we've got those posts in place, we're just going to flush them up using my Japanese Bakuma, a flush cut saw. These things are extremely sharp, so keep your hand away from it. I grip the actual leg of the stool. Just like that. And now you can see at the top with the wedges in place. Now they certainly look decorative that we chose walnut, but they are extraordinarily structural in use. There's our stool. I did make a prototype of this a little bit earlier and actually stress tested it with my 200 plus pound frame, and it works just great. So that is our biblical stool. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm hoping to get a little bit of footage, if not video, some stills of the Sunday school class, and hopefully it's a big hit.
So once the project was complete, it was just a matter of taking all of those parts, 20 seats, 60 legs, 70 some odd wedges, and boxing it all up and getting it down to the church for Sunday morning. The one thing in the back of my mind that was scaring me a little bit is typical with green wood construction. Once you start building, you need to move along at a decent pace, because as you start cutting the greener wood or drilling holes to the greener wood, it starts to dry out a lot faster. And my concern was that the holes I drilled for those legs were sized perfectly for the 3/4 inch tenons to fit into, but if they had a chance to shrink in my shop overnight, since it is heated and rather dry in there, they might not fit as well the next day. So I tried to do my best to remedy that, and I turned the heat off in my shop, hoping that maybe I would just freeze some of that moisture. And once I got down to the church the next morning, I went testing the fit. They were a little bit more snug, but I don't think the moisture differential between the two boards was such that it was going to make that big of a difference. But it is something to think about in green wood construction. So once we got down there, things got really crazy really fast. We had about 15 5- and 6-year-olds show up, and because of that, I honestly just didn't get enough enough photos or enough video. My wife managed to snap a few photos, and here's actually a shot of me getting ready to saw the tops of the legs flush with the stool. Obviously, I kept that Bakuma razor saw away from the kids as much as possible. All the little boys were, of course, very fascinated with it and wanted to touch it and play with it, but those things are so sharp, they'll cut you just looking at them funny. And then it was, you can see a shot here with all of the stools kind of scattered around the floor. And actually, if you look in the top right corner of that picture, you can see a small little altar, and the top piece of that is a piece of mahogany that if you go back in my blog, you'll see that was the board that I refinished for my mother-in-law. It came out really pretty, and it actually looks really nice on that painted bottom as well. Then here is the one video shot that I got trying out the stools as we sat down for a lesson. You can see all the rocking and moving back and forth on those stools. That was the real stress test. All the torque they put on those stools, and they handled great. We didn't have any problems. So then it was time to quiet down a little bit. It was prayer time, and everybody was really happy to have a stool to sit down on and give thanks. And then we got into something a little bit different. One of the little boys decided to start stacking the tower, or the stools. I guess he was trying to make his own Tower of Babel. And believe me, when that toppled and came falling down, it put another stress test on the stools, and they stood up to the punishment. So finally, here is our last shot of the class posed with their stools. Everybody's really happy. You can see a few of those kids are even a little blurred. That just gives you an idea of just how much they don't sit still. So anyway, that was the build. It was a great experience. I really enjoyed doing the research. It was surprising the information that I found out. So I hope that you guys picked up a little something in this. And if you have questions or comments, please get in touch with me. The contact information is scrolling across the screen as we speak. So thanks a lot, folks. We'll talk to you next week.